Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Ushered. I am the Executive Director of the Center for Memories. On behalf of the Center for Memories, I'm glad to welcome us this evening to an interesting webinar and conversation we're going to have today. We have been discussing in the last 1 month about a very important personality for us in the person of Dr. Michael Obara, who happens to be a great role model for so many people, especially among the Igbos and in Nigeria and beyond. The Center for Memories decided to put together an important and world-class documentary on this important personality. And part of our plan to celebrate for a year-long centenary celebration, posthumous centenary celebration for him, is that we're going to be holding the screening of this documentary, a global screening of this documentary every month. And this screening would always be introduced with a webinar, such as we are having today. And so in this webinar this evening, we'll be discussing the theme, Oluobodo, a call to service. We'll be discussing this topic, looking at the person of late Dr. Michael Obara and how he exemplified himself as a true definition of Oluobodo. We're also going to try to see how this forms a good challenge to leaders of today in Igbo land, in Nigeria, and across the world, how we can bring back Oluobodo to our society and use it to bring about needed development in our society. To discuss this important topic with us today, we have Chief Dr. John Nyanwodo, who is the immediate Past President or President General of Ohanese Ndigbo. We also have with us Dr. Ije Jidemma. Dr. Jidemma is the CEO of Leading Edge Consulting. We're also going to be joined by...
Thank you very much. I'm glad to be here.
Welcome, Chief Onyema Ugochukwu, the first executive chairman of Niger Delta Development Commission. And we also have with us the person who produced this world-class documentary in the person of Ezennia Ed Emeka Kazo, who is a friend of the CFM and has done so many things to impact the Igbo society and Igbo history. Ezennia, you're welcome.
Thank you very much, Uchenna. Thank you. Thank you.
To moderate this session is Mr. Jerome Okolo. He's the co-founder, Safi Africa Energy Limited. You're welcome, sir.
Thank you very much, Uchenna. Happy to be here. I'm looking forward to the exchange of views and also to watching the biopic on M.I. Obara.
Thank you, sir. Our hope is that this documentary would help us to look at the man, M.I. Power, as he's popularly called, his virtues and some of the enduring value system that helped him to become to achieve what he achieved before he died. Look at his legacy and how that forms a challenge to all of us. We'll also touch a bit on how to groom servant leaders for our society. Who should do that? And how can we achieve all of that? So we're going to use the next, spend the next 55 minutes thereabouts to discuss this subject matter, Oluobodo, a call to service. I enjoin you to participate in this webinar. At the end of the webinar by 6 p.m., the screening of the documentary would start on YouTube. I'm going to hand us over to Mr. Jerome Okolo to drive the conversation.
Sorry, Uchenna, can I just point out that Chief Oluobodo is online now as GCA Capital Partner. So if you don't see his name, it's as GCA Capital Partner, just so you're aware, just so that Jerome is also aware. Thank you.
Yes, I have just promoted him to a panelist now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Uchenna, and thank you, Ezenia, for helping me out, because I wouldn't have been aware of Chief Oluobodo's presence. Ladies and gentlemen, friends from around the world, we're very, very happy today that you all join us to take part in this interactive conversation about the life of a great man, the life of a great leader. We're going to be examining what made him great and what made him a special kind of leader, and using that mirror to examine where we are today, why we apparently do not have people of his own stature straddling our homeland today. We would find out what led to the success of MI Opera. We will discuss aspects of the excellent film that has been made on his life. We will also try and bring in other facts that some of us may have had access to that have not been made public knowledge. So it's a journey of mutual discovery that we're all going to be embarking on. To kick things off for us, I would like to first of all invite Dr. Ije Jidemma to start the conversation by perhaps sharing with us some of her prepared comments on the life and times of Dr. M.I. Opara.
Thank you very much, Mr. Jerome Okolo. It is indeed a great privilege and honor to be a panelist in something that has to do with the Premier of Eastern Region in the First Republic, Dr. M.I. Opara, M.I. Power. You know, Right Honorable Dr. M.I. Opara is someone, I'm still talking about him in the present because he has left so much legacy. He's someone we are very proud of. We are proud of the footprints, his footprints. We are proud of what he left behind. He was exemplary in every way. Was a visionary leader, a leader that has clarity of vision in terms of what he intended to do. M.I. Opara was in no doubt about why he was there. He was there to serve. According to him, a servant cannot be above his masters. That was his own viewpoint of service. And so he put in all his wherewithal in service of the people and derived intrinsic satisfaction by so doing. He did so much. He felt that agriculture is salvation for us. And he put in a lot of developed farm settlements, encouraged people, even had his own farm, and made his contemporaries also have their farms across Eastern region, in Ikom, in fact, all over the place, Umuahia, and so on and so forth. So he lived it. He lived what he preached. He did not just say things and did not do it. He was a game changer. In fact, at the point he came to the stage, the Eastern region was one of the poorest regions. But within 6 years, he had transformed the region into a great, in fact, one of the fastest growing part of the world. This he did through his commitment, a very, very committed leader and courageous. You know, as we say, you have to stand for something. You have to stand for something. That's one of the things that I like him today. He was courageous, even when there was a problem with the legislators and the party. He stood his ground. He was loyal to his mentor, Dr. Nnamdi Azikiwe. He wasn't those ones fly-by-night sort of people. And even when he was locked up because of the coal mine riot, you know, He knew that they were looking for higher ideals. And thereafter, when the civil rule was granted to the natives, he became the premier. He took over from Dr. Nnamdi Azikiwe, who then resigned and became Governor General. So loyalty, these values are virtues. Having clarity of vision, being courageous, you have to start for something. You cannot be on shifting grounds. Loyalty, commitment, and actually doing what you can to make a difference. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you very, very much, Dr. Chidema. I think as everybody can see and hear, I think you've kicked things up very, very well for us. I think the most important thing is that we can all agree that M.I. Okpara was a game changer. He did not leave things the way he saw things. And I like the way you framed the life and times of Michael Okpara. He came in when our region was one of the poorest. There was hunger in the land. We were lagging behind the Western region in terms of education. People were essentially not sure about how to respond to the colonial environment. He started his leadership before he got his position. I think this is one thing I am hopeful that we can continue to emphasize. The fact that Michael Okpara was Premier of Eastern Region was incidental. He could have been a leader from anywhere. He was a leader before he became Premier, and he was a leader after he had left office. He continued to influence people. I like the attributes you have highlighted, the attributes of loyalty, commitment, and clarity of vision. A leader can only lead when he knows the way, shows the way, and goes along the same way with his people. You cannot lead if people do not know where you're going. And I like that fact of trying to point out that we did not wait for him to finish his leadership before people realized that he knew where we were supposed to go and he knew how to influence people to travel that journey with him. To continue the conversation, I would like to invite somebody who has clearly been also a leader in Igbo land, somebody who has left also his own footprints across our land, Chief Onyema Ugochukwu, to please join the conversation and please share with us your comments about the life and times of Dr. M.I. Okpara.
Thank you very much. I'm delighted to be part of this celebration of Okpara today. I want to say, Ije, it's good to see you again.
Thank you very much.
Long.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let me start by thanking the Center for Memories for putting up this documentary and the webinar. Okpara was probably the greatest of the leaders we had in the 60s in terms of what he achieved and what he had intended to achieve. Unfortunately, in Nigeria, he's not given enough credit. On the 50th anniversary of Nigerian independence, for instance, a compendium of Nigerian leaders was published. And somehow, Dr. Okpara was not in that compendium. What you're doing is filling in the gap, and I think it's very important. I want to encourage you, and I'm happy to be part of this. My takeoff point will be really a question people ask all the time. Why did Dr. Nnamdi Azikiwe choose Okpara as his successor when there were older people in politics and age around him? My answer for that would be, for instance, that Okpara and Zik had interacted closely in a cabinet relationship for about 8 years before the choice was made. From 1953 to 1959, they worked in the same cabinet. That was enough time for the qualities Okpara had to show up and for Zik to also get his own impressions of him. One of those qualities which actually got him into trouble with Zik was his, his objection to injustice. He was, first of all, of course, forthright in his attitudes. You knew where you stood with Dr. Okpara at any time. He was very honest in his opinions and the things he did. But then around 1956, and following what happened to Ojike, which they called the Ojike incident, Okpara was very unhappy about how Ojike was forced out of the government, and Ojike died 1 year after he left. And he made himself very clear to Zik. But then he and Zik sort of fell out of favor. But even while he was out of favor, he was still extremely loyal to Zik. And he showed this during the Foster Sutton inquiry, which was set up by the colonialists to actually undermine Zik and his authority. Okpara was in the forefront of defending Zik. And when the NCNC called for an election, Okpara was leading that campaign. The NCNC, after the Foster Sutton inquiry, went to ask the electorate for a new mandate. Okpara worked very hard on it. And eventually, he and Zik had to sit down and talk about what happened. I mean, the disagreement or Zik's anger with him was such that even though he was the leader of the House in 1958, when Zik went on holiday, he appointed somebody else, Ayu Akpabio, as acting premier. Okpara, of course, made himself very clear to Zik. And by the time Zik had to make the appointment, it wasn't difficult for him to decide who to choose. Because Zik himself found that even while Okpara was out of favor, Okpara worked for him, gave him extreme loyalty, one of the attributes that he had. There were many other attributes. I'm happy EJ has mentioned some of them. He was a humanist. He was somebody who related to the people. We never forgot his humble background, and he felt at home among the people. Then he had clarity of vision. Wherever he had worked up to the time he became premier, he tried to bring about a change. In fact, one of the things that happened was that on the day the House passed the motion to appoint him the Premier of Eastern Nigeria, in his acceptance speech, he outlined the program of the government for the next year and for the next several years. He was already prepared for what was going to happen. So this was a unique kind of leader who, fortunately, and as a person, of course, he was very dynamic. You can't be in his presence, or you couldn't be in his presence without feeling drawn to him. This extended to his relationship with the people of Eastern Nigeria at the time. He wanted to lead them from the front. He was there to work with them and to drive whatever the policies were. And it was not surprising that he achieved so much success. What happened at the time was that because of the dynamism of Dr. Okpara, the people themselves got into it as if Eastern Nigeria was in competition with itself. One example of what happened at the time was, like we mentioned earlier, education. The West was actually not ahead of the East. Zik himself made an issue of that. The Eastern Nigeria was, in fact, in 1959, ahead of the Western Nigeria in the number of people in schools. But for example, in 1960, Eastern Nigeria had 106 secondary schools made up of the grammar schools, the commercial schools, and the technical schools. But by 1965, Eastern Nigeria had 321 secondary schools. Many of these were built by individuals, by communities, and things like that. So somehow the premier and the people were able to achieve some kind of synergy, which meant that while the government was doing its own bit, the people were also active in doing their own. My example of this particular thing will be in my area. There wasn't a secondary school in 1960, but 1962 there were 3 secondary schools. By 1965 there were 5. 1 girls' school added to it and 1 technical school, with the other 3 that this was the kind of thing that was happening. A leader who found synergy with the people he was leading. And it was not surprising that such amazing results were achieved. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much, Chief Onyema Ugochukwu. I think your experience shines through. You've helped us to go back to the very, very beginning, the emergence of the leader. I think this is one of those particular aspects where I think we need to pay attention to in discussing the life of Michael Okpara. Michael Okpara did not emerge by accident. He did not fall from the sky. He emerged because he was identified. He emerged because he was able to display exemplary qualities when he was working with Chief Dr. Nnamdi Azikiwe, who observed him at close quarters, mentored him, supported him, worked with him, and was able to see that this was a man who could carry forward the vision that Nnamdi Azikiwe also had for the region. I think the question of how leaders emerge in Eastern Nigeria these days will form a fundamental part of the answer to the question of why we do not appear to have people of the caliber of M.I. Okpara these days. The way they emerge is not the same way that Michael Okpara emerged. Speaking about somebody who worked for 8 years in the cabinet with Nnamdi Azikiwe, that is the kind of time that allows people to give you increasingly more complicated responsibilities and see how you cope. And probably that is one of the ways that China has been able to show the way they identify leaders, the way they groom leaders, the way they challenge them with increasing complexity of difficulties before they emerge onto the national stage. We also need to talk about the fact that the qualities that could have prevented Michael Okpara from emerging in a modern day Igbo land are the same qualities that made him emerge. The idea of being forthright in his views, the idea of being absolutely against injustice, the idea of being completely honest and not minding whether that was favorable to the particular circumstance or not. You knew where he stood. He did not care whether he would suffer short-term disadvantage by being honest. He was resolutely and absolutely predictably honest. And again, those are the kind of attributes that we are not witnessing, and probably one of those things that could go a long way to explaining why we are not having the same caliber of leaders in Eastern Nigeria. I think we've mentioned agriculture. Dr. Jidema has sort of emphasized on agriculture. Chief Onyema Ugochukwu has emphasized on education. I want to take the opportunity to draw our attention to Michael Okpara's industrial policy. His industrial policy was founded on a very, very clear understanding of the 2 main determinants for success or failure. One was the paucity. We did not have access to capital. There was not enough money in Eastern Nigeria, but we had a surplus of labor. And Michael Okpara's industrial policy was about how to use the scarce resource of capital and also combine it with the absolutely preponderant surplus of human capital. And that led to the kind of industries that were developed. That led to the kind of agricultural processing industries. But he had even bigger visions than primary processing. In 1954, Michael Okpara decided that Eastern Nigeria should make the leap into the 20th century as an industrial power. He decided that at that time, using the resources of limestone at Nkalago, using the iron ore that was available in the Nsukka axis, and using the fact that we had electricity, which was coming from Oji River, he decided to set up the steel complex in Emene, And the steel complex actually started producing steel. And by 1955, the steel being produced in MNA was being shipped across the country, even getting up to the boundaries of Niger Republic in the north. This led the federal government to actually begin to pay attention to steel production. And in 1964, the federal government decided that they were going to step into the steel production and copy what was going on in Eastern Nigeria, and decided that there was going to be 2 centers of steel production in Nigeria, one in the east, which had been started by Michael Okpara, and another one to be located in Lokoja. And we all know how that ended, from Lokoja to Ajaokuta and back to modern Nigeria. But the fact that a leader in one small part of Nigeria was able to fundamentally influence national industrial policy with very, very little resources, at the time running what is now 9 states with very, very meager resources again, and how they were able to coordinate all of the administration from Enugu to Ogoja, from Port Harcourt to Calabar, from Abakaliki to the farthest flunks of Ibibio land, and all the way down to the boundaries of modern day Ondo State. This is the kind of analysis that, if you start paying attention to, you begin to get a feeling for the kind of colossus that we're talking about. Somebody that was able to run all of this with no WhatsApp, no email, and people were just able to get in their cars and drive along and extend the influence of the man who was leading from Enugu. And again, that brings us to the fundamental definition of what a leader is. A leader is somebody who is able to motivate people to their highest levels of action. If you can't motivate, you're not a leader. Even if you're called excellency, even if you have 15 or 20 Prados driving around you, if you cannot motivate people around you, you are not a leader. You can hold the office for 4 or 8 years, and when you leave, we should forget you very quickly. But people like Michael Okpara will live in our minds forever, because they demonstrated leadership. They made the most of what they were given, and they were able to raise our people from very, very, very shaky beginnings to become one of the fastest developing regions in the entire world. And that is why we will never stop talking about him. And we hope that we will have more like him in the future to take us further than where we are presently. Uche, I'm going to hand over back to you to help us to determine how we're going to take the conversation forward.
Okay, thank you, sir. I think we are supposed to be looking at grooming servant leaders in our society, taking after the example that Michael Okpara has laid down for us. So how and by whom? How do we groom servant leaders who can step into the shoes of Michael Okpara, and who are the people that should be responsible to groom these servant leaders that would reenact Oluobodo in our society, the spirit of Oluobodo in our society? So that's, I think, what we should discuss in the next couple of minutes before we go into audience participation. Yes.
Okay, I think the best way to do this will be to structure it in the shape of a conversation between Dr. Jidenna and Onyema. So what I would like to do is, I think you represent 2 different generations of Igbo thought. I think I may want to invite you to look back and say, okay, across Igbo land, can you identify other instances where people have been groomed to come into leadership, especially at a young age? Let's not forget that Michael Okpara was the youngest ever premier in Nigeria. He was only 36 years old when he came into office. And so, Dr. Jidenna, first of all, to you, can I ask you to cast your mind wide and see other youthful leaders who have come into prominence and shown promise, and perhaps shown us a little bit of that Michael Okpara in them?
Thank you very much, Mr. Okolo. As you rightly said, we might actually be looking for another kind of leaders now, the sort of leader we had in Dr. Michael Okpara that served us well. I think that's what we should be doing. And like you know, Dr. Okpara was a servant leader. And who is a servant leader? A servant leader is one who is there. He's there for other people. He's there to serve others. He's not there because he wants to acquire wealth that it's not duly acquired. He's not there for embezzlement. He's not there to throw his weight around for people to know that he's there. He's not there to sort of frighten people. He's there to be exemplary. He's there to show the way in the way he behaves, in the way he comports himself. He's there to prop up people, train them. He's there as a role model because he gives examples in the way he performs. He's inspirational, inspirational. And that was one thing he did very well, being motivational. So that people, what is leadership after all? Is influence potential, getting people to do what you want them to do, achieve the common goal, and being happy doing it. And that's why a lot was achieved when you are talking about community schools, and so many other people took it upon themselves to set up schools. So I would not say that we do not have these leaders in today's Nigeria or in Igbo land. We have a lot of leaders like that have done a lot in their own capacities. Short of mentioning names, I know young people who have actually done terrific things. If I may say, a young person like Ndidi Nwuneli has made a lot of impact through Leap Africa. Because leaders do not just emerge, right? Leaders, we have to look back. They don't just emerge. It's the way you have been groomed. It's the way you have been groomed to know what leadership is about, knowing that it's about others, knowing that it's about common good. And when people are taking through all that, in Leap Africa, a lot of young people come, they volunteer, volunteerism, even when people don't have work, they learn through others, and by so doing, they're really motivated to do a lot. So in your own sphere of influence, you have to put on the light. That's what leadership is about. Leadership cuts across levels. It's not just the governor that is leader. I must tell you, it's not just the governor. It's not just those in the House of Rep that are leaders. Leaders cut across. Even in this generation, I know some people, it's exemplary. I've been in the airport and I've seen our former governor, Peter Obi, stand in the queue in UK. So some of these, they're exemplary in the way they do things. He has said it over and over again that you don't need to have so much entourage, people who have nothing to do, following you around. For what? Today's leadership is not about ego. It's not about throwing your weight around. It's about what you can do. You can see the chancellor in Germany, what she has been able to do. She goes for her own shopping. It's not about what you wear, if I may also say that, or whatever, the type of cars you drive and all that. It's about the difference you make in the lives of people. It is also about the clarity in Nigeria is that no, people have not defined our vision, that is our desired destination, our desired goal. If you have clarity and define it very well, you will see so many people following you. Nigerians are not difficult to lead. All they need is to let us know where we are going. And you will see a lot of people ready to sacrifice, to do a lot. And in so doing, you have to be honest. In any case, you have to be honest. Stand for something. And you will see people will gather. Why we are having issues is that people have double standards. They say one thing, they do another thing. Stand, in what you do. And then in terms of wisdom, clarity of vision, I've seen young leaders in terms of what they say. I've seen someone like Osita Chidoka talk about, wisdom, and whatever. Those are the kinds of things you have to. So that's what leadership is about. If you differentiate yourself and able to mobilize other people through your influence, to do that, which will lead us to the promised land. That's what we need. So in other words, what I'm trying to say is that the current leaders that we have are not the right one, generally speaking. There are some people that are good, but the mainstream leaders are not, do not even have any business being there, because they're not what leaders are supposed to be. They're not there to serve others. They're not even inspired to serve others. They do not derive intrinsic satisfaction by serving others. They have short-sighted view of leadership. They don't have helicopter view of things. It's transactional as far as they're concerned. It's cash and carry. But that's not what leadership is about. A great leader would find some satisfaction when you see that you are moving your people from point A to point B. That will be your greatest satisfaction. For instance, when Opera came back, he didn't even have a house in his village. It was his close friends and allies that built a house to him. As far as I'm concerned, I'm sure she didn't even worry so much about it. So that's what leadership is about. So most of these people that are in positions of leadership, they don't even know what it's about. So now it becomes difficult to change values. I know people like Professor Pat Utomi set up Center for Values in Leadership, but I can tell you that after a certain age, it is very, very difficult to change values. So we must take a long distance view of things. We must take a helicopter view of things if we have to come back to where we were before. In terms of reorientating our youth, catch them young. I can tell you the Jesuits are exemplary in this. The Jesuits, I'm just using an example. Like if you have Loyola Jesuits, for instance, they would make sure that their students, they go on to, there's a sort of program they have that even young students, they go and teach in the catchment area in the community, teach all those little children. Maybe people like 10, 12 years, 13 years are teaching smaller children arithmetic and so on and so forth. So that is how to groom leaders, values, to think about others. They don't see all those indigent communities and they derive intrinsic satisfaction doing that. Sometimes at a point, they go to do their service during vacation. They can work in motherless babies' home. They can work in old people's home, disabled people's home. In so doing, they will realize what life is about. That is about impact. Then their whole mindset is changed in the way they look at things, you know. So even when you give them so much, they're not even interested. I mean, in terms of material things, they're not even interested. I can tell you there are some people who have passed through some of these areas that have been so groomed that even when their parents, even when some people that have stolen so much from government ask them to come, they are not even interested because this is not the way they have been shaped. So we have here our people that actually have the values. But the problem is that we do not have the aggregate of people to be mainstream. So now what I would rather say is that I challenge most of us that are elsewhere. I know some of them have tried to be in some defined leadership positions, formal leadership, let me put it that way, formal leadership positions like governors or Senate, and they had failed. Yes, it's true some of them had failed because of the way things are running right now. But I bet you that if we have a lot of aggregate of people that think the same way, it will no longer be the same. And I think we have suffered a lot. We have suffered so much that this is the time for people to begin to think the other way. And then for people not to think that, oh, I'm playing safe. Oh, I'm reading people's lips. Oh, I cannot stand for anything. You have to stand for something. Your life is only once. And people have to stand for something. You have given an example of Opera, how he stood. And at the end of the day, he triumphed. And even if you don't get that, it's okay. you are still satisfied that whatever you stand for has been realized. So in conclusion, I would say that yes, we have people like Obara in today's Nigeria. Yes, we have them, but we don't have them in enough because of so many things that have happened in our country. But that notwithstanding, people should assume leadership. It's not just when you are now appointed. In so many ways, do what you can do on your own, in your sphere of influence. And from there, one light turns into conglomeration of light. Thank you.
Thank you. Well,
thank you very, very much, Dr. Chidema. That was a very, very powerful. That was a very powerful contribution. I really think it's extremely difficult to disagree with your analysis. It all starts from nurture. How do we groom people? How do we prepare the kids? How do we put in them the right values so that when they grow up, they don't depart from those values? I like the idea of bringing in the Jesuits. The Jesuits were known to say, give me the child for 7 years and I will give you the man. If you train kids when they are young and impressionable with the right values, it's very difficult for them to depart from those values. I think part of what we have lost is that we have lost those institutions that help us to put the right values. When I was growing up in the 70s, people used to swagger around Eastern Nigeria bragging about their secondary schools, from DMGS to CKC to CIC to all of that. Somebody should correct me, but I don't think we have built a great secondary school in Eastern Nigeria since the end of the Civil War. Where have all the schools gone? Why are we not building those great schools? Those great schools that will build great people. Without putting in the right values at the right time, we might struggle to change people who are already formed in their cynical ways of aggrandizement, of grabbing everything for themselves, of being only in tune with money, only being guided by what they can put in their own pockets. I like the idea that leadership in your definition is about the impact you can make on greater society. It's about the service you can give. It's about being able to give that service and make that impact from wherever you are. You do not have to be a governor. And many governors have shown us that they are completely incapable of leading, even from that office. So we have to lead from wherever we are. Whether you're the parish priest, you can lead. Whether you're a farmer in your village teaching other farmers, you can lead. Whether you're a teacher in a primary school, you can lead. Whether you're in Ohanese, you can lead. If you're in a political party and you see people trying to force people who are not competent on our people, you can lead by speaking up and standing against things like that. I think there are so many opportunities for leadership, and we all think there are only 5 positions you can lead from in Eastern Nigeria. There are 1 million positions to lead from. Everybody should lead by the exemplar of their lives. You can only lead by what you have done. You can only lead by what you lead others to do. If you are there corrupting the minds of other people and deceiving people and making people to destroy things and to not use the right opportunities, then you are not a leader, you are a destroyer. I will also at this time like to go back to Chief Onyema Ugochukwu, who I'm sure can give us some personal experiences of how he has been able to identify some leaders in his time and been able to influence some people in his time and been able to lead to some of those kind of positive experiences that we're trying to identify. Please, Chief Ugochukwu, can you help us with some personal anecdotes from your life about leadership examples?
I would like to go back a bit to the Obara story, really. The period he worked in had a structure for producing leaders. Leaders were trained by the system. The parties groomed those who emerged to become leaders. That is something we have lost completely. These days, very few governors will allow their deputy governors to succeed them. I don't know what they're afraid of, but you can only find 1 or 2 cases where deputy governors have been allowed to succeed the governors. What we've had has been trial by error. Every time there's a transition, we find new people who come in And the first part of a transition is a learning process. They spend time learning how to govern the places they have inherited. And that does not help matters. Unfortunately, it is part of why we've had so many disasters. EJ mentioned somebody who in this our new era has succeeded. I agree with her completely. Peter B has performed exceptionally well in the circumstances he found himself. Before him, I will give an example of Sam Bakwe, who also tried to follow the path of Dr. Okpara in what he achieved in the old Imo State. There may be others, but these two at least are examples of people who followed and they did exceptionally well. Something else that has changed. In Dr. Okpara's time, there was planning. I understand planning has gone out of fashion. Planning was fashionable in those days. And there was, for instance, an Eastern Nigeria Development Plan, 1962 to 1968. You know, every region had its own, and there was the national one. The planning in that way made it important for governments to set down their promises to the people. And when you have put it down, you cannot now claim that you didn't mean it. What we find these days is that people make all kinds of promises to the electorate when they are looking for their votes. And then when they get in there, they will say, I didn't say so, somebody else said it. They deny their manifestos and they fail to do the things they had promised. Having a plan, those plans, spelled out, agreed by everybody, actually kept the leaders on the path that they had projected. Let me just give this little example. I think it shows how old I have become. In 1963, during our speech day at Methodist College, Uzakali, the premier, Dr. Okpara, came to speak to us. And part of what he said is what he was telling us. We have planned to produce enough food and to produce export goods, agricultural goods, to feed everybody, as well as put some money in peasant pocket. In summarizing that part of the plan, he said that by what he had planned was that by 1970, he was speaking in 1963, by 1970, which was 7 years down the road, Eastern Nigeria would have been producing most of the consumer goods that the people needed and would have gone into the production of capital goods. He summarized it in the way that apart from educating all citizens and providing medical and health facilities for all, the government, the Eastern Nigeria will be feeding, clothing, and housing all its citizens. And then providing work. It didn't say employment. I think that's a different kind of conception. Providing work for all the able-bodied people. There was a holistic plan. You feed the people, you educate the people. Even the education plan at that time was shifting gradually towards science because of the things that were planned. In terms of clarity of thought, some of the things Dr. Okpara did, like somebody had mentioned earlier, were quite unique. Dr. Okpara built a gas pipeline from Port Harcourt to Aba. The industries that were in Port Harcourt, the Transamadi Industrial Estate, were geared to use gas instead of flaring the gas. But they were also supplying gas to the factories in Aba to use. It took Nigeria until 1980 to find industrial use of gas. Dr. Okpara was so many years ahead of his contemporary and even those who succeeded him. Let me make an excuse for our new people. I think the circumstances have changed very much. Eastern Nigeria at the time had enough room for independent action. What the military have done to us is to cut the states into pieces. And now, if you want to set up a factory, you have to come to Lagos, Abuja, to obtain a permit from somebody who probably doesn't know where you are talking about. People are being run from Abuja in a way they were not run from a long distance. It puts constraints on those who want to work are able to do, all kinds of restrictions. And I use those who want to work advisedly. EJ has mentioned it earlier. There are people, we've had many instances where people get into power and they don't have an idea what to do, or they're more interested in building up themselves than in building up the people, providing for the people they are supposed to rule. There's so many instances. Unfortunately, it's actually becoming the norm these days. It's not a problem we will blame on youths. Dr. Obara himself set an example. He was a young man when he achieved all of that. EJ mentioned Peter Obi. Peter himself was a young man when in relative terms, he was a young man when he became governor of Anambra, and he was still able to achieve the things he did. I tried to I ran for election in Abia myself for governor. I believed I won the election by 61% of the vote, but then I didn't become governor. And there were people in my own party who didn't want me to become because they felt I wasn't going to do the things they would want me to do. That is how we are these days. It is not, the system of producing those who govern us is very defective. It is only by chance that we will find those who will do well. It will be a question of luck, picking, whether you get people who are going to do work for the people, or you're going to get one of what we are having these days. For me, in particular, okay, you ask how I impacted on people. Basically, I'm a journalist. I was a journalist most of my life. And I did work with journalists in that area. But I had an opportunity to work in NDDC. And these days we hear of people doing forensic audit that do not end. The forensic audit was announced 18 months ago. And you wonder what kind of audit it is that doesn't end. People came to me to talk about NDDC at the beginning of that so-called audit. I said, no, I will wait until they finish because my period was also being investigated. But the point was that we went out there and tried to use the limited resources that we had. In 4 years I was there, all the money we had was 117 billion naira. If you divided that, it will give you an average of 30 billion naira a year. And you had to spend that in 9 states. And so what we did, since we were the first executive, we had very strict financial guidelines. We had manpower guidelines. We decided that creating employment in the Niger Delta did not mean that we should go out there and employ everybody there to work in NDDC. We kept our staff strength at 600 persons in the 4 years I was there. Whatever money we had, we used it to develop issues. But the most important thing I think we did was to develop the Niger Delta Master Plan. That plan was a 15-year plan. Before I left, we presented a draft of it to the Federal Executive Council. I think under my brother, Timia Alaibe, it was finalized and adopted, but then nobody implemented it, including those who were in NDDC, which was a tragedy. If we had had continuity, then maybe some people would have carried on and implemented that plan. 15 years down the line was last year. It's over. And yet you can't point at anything that came out of that master plan, which everybody praised and adopted. And that is.
Thank you very much, Chief Ugochukwu. My sincere apologies for interrupting your flow. I'm terribly sorry to do that. Please forgive me. We are running out of time. We will run a few minutes over time because we've been joined by Chief Oluobodo. I would like to invite Ike here to give us a few comments at this stage so that we can bring in some of his thoughts before we conclude. We need to conclude in the next 5 minutes. Oluobodo, Ike here. You're very welcome, sir.
Thank you very much. I will leave it at that. But the point I wanted to make is that we make plans, even where we make plans in Nigeria, we don't implement it because there's no continuity in the succession of those who are in power. The governor doesn't want anybody in the government to succeed him. We face somebody from outside, and there's always a disconnect, and we waste a lot of resources. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much, Chief Ugochukwu. Thank you very much. And please, again, pardon my interrupting your flow.
No problem.
Thank you. Do we have Chief Nwodo with us? Okay, if we don't have Chief Nwodo, I think this is a very good place for us to end. Chief Onyema Ugochukwu has actually, I think, given us the second bookend to this conversation. We started by pointing out how the person, Dr. M.I. Okpara, emerged, the kind of values that drove him. And we ended by...
Jerome, I'm right here.
Okay.
Hey,
here. Let me hand over to you. Unfortunately, technology is letting us down. I didn't know you were with us. So please, I hand over to you before I make the final concluding remarks.
First of all, let me apologize for being late. I was driving back from my village and I had a mechanical hitch with my car, which took 1 hour to rectify. But right now that I'm here, I thank you and all of you who have made contributions here for making today a day of celebration of one of the most illustrious leaders that we've had in our times, Dr. Michael Ihonukara Okpara. I grew up at the time Dr. Okpara was premier. His tenure in office is exemplary and, in my view, unmatched in our lifetime. I grew up at the time Okpara was premier and I saw the advantages of his governance. Okpara came to government with a mission. He had tutelage. Apart from graduating from the medical school in Yaba, Okpara went through Ministry of Production, Ministry of Agriculture, and Ministry of, I've forgotten one other. Those ministries prepared him for the ingredients he brought to his governance. As a young man, I went to school at primary and secondary level under the reign of Dr. Okpara. When I was in primary school, I started in St. Patrick's Eva Valley, which is a rural area of Enugu. In my school were children of miners, children of carpenters, and my father's driver, his junior brother, Peter Enejere, my father's driver was James Enejere, was my classmate in what we call Infant 1. There was no school for the minister's son and another school for the driver's son. If I was still childbearing today, I doubt if my driver's son would go to the same school as my son. Dr. Okpara's educational policy did not give economic stratification in terms of your accessibility to a school. It's a matter of your productivity. In my secondary school, There were two beneficiaries of my father's scholarship in the same class with me. And they beat me in physics, in chemistry, and biology, and mathematics. And I beat them in English language, in history, and those subjects that were subjective rather than objective. And consequently, in the overall results, they came first, second, third, fourth, fifth, whereas I was willing to come 10th or 15th. My father gave me a knock in my head, which will give me a headache for the whole week, and saying to me that those whose fathers defect to him, I would defect to them. And it catapulted me into engaging myself more seriously in my academic endeavors to see that I did not let up my father. I studied law and economics, but I still remember my chemistry because we didn't do alternative to practicals. We did science subjects. I can tell you the bones from the cranium to the metatarsals. I can tell you all the chemical reactions of oxidation, reduction, double decomposition, lateral displacement of radicals, crystallization. I saw them. I could do litmus just between alkaline and acid. That was Okpara's legacy. The education was practical, and it gave me a broad-minded vision of the world in spite of my specialization. I saw my father as Minister of Points at the industry, pioneer and in Calago cement factory. At the same time as he was doing a pottery factory for plates. At the same time as he was premiering a premier brewery in Umuahia. At the same time as he was doing a Calago cement factory. At the same time as he was doing the iron and steel project in Emene. At the same time as he was doing a gas factory in Emene. At the same time as I was pioneering every civil servant to own a poultry behind his house. Otherwise, he will not get his salaries. And at the same time as 25 cups of gari was 1 shilling. At the same time as there was a piggery. At the same time as there were farm settlements in Uruguay. At the same time as there was a cow production outfit in Cross River State, in Obudu, in a cattle ranch. Dealing with Muturu cows, especially of our cows grown in this part of the world. He had a gubernatorial perspective of development. I used to drink water from public taps in Gold Camp. And I didn't need to have it chlorinated or to have a bottle filtered. And they didn't give me any disease whatsoever. Life was abundant. Life was nice. There was no social certification qualifying you for access to development. And the man was disciplined. He was transparently honest. I remember that I joined Mbazika Amici and Mbanugo in a committee. I was the youngest to go around raising money to build a house for him in his home because he didn't build a house befitting of him in his home while he was developing the Western Nigeria. I remember the critical and the windows, doors and windows in Port Harcourt. I remember the rubber factory in Costa. He did not differentiate between Igbo and non-Igbo parts of Eastern Nigeria. He developed all of them. Scholarships were given to people just like people in Pakistan, people in Singapore, sent their people to come and discover the secret of knowledge in developed countries of the world, to discover science and the normative areas of knowledge, and bring them back and germinate growth of knowledge in their homes. The University of Nigeria had vice chancellors like Glenn Taggart, who came from the United States of America. They built farms. My mother bought big old chicks from the farms in the University of Nigeria and Soka, and piglets to do a piggery. In other words, we could generate income from other sources other than my father's earning. That does not exist now. And the transparency in government did not exist now. The government was populist. You won election on account of your popularity. People were begged to stand for election because they were loved by their people. It's not together to buy the position. The requisites of people in government were generally tailored to the level of their productivity. But today we have jumbo salaries, which are not related to the kind of domestic control, regional governments control security, control the executive jurisdiction on areas of exclusive responsibility of the regional government. Today, to go for appeal for a land matter in the Southeast, the Supreme Court, when judges there who sit on this have not nominated our local Supreme Court and our local usages. Today, there is no domestic autonomy for local policy. Every commissioner of police in the Southeast knows nothing about languages or our terrain or local usages. And yet, the Supreme over policing here, or para was that dream we realized exists.
Ike, I'm so sorry. I know we could listen to you for another 2 months. I have listened to you for hours talking about Dr. Okpara and your father and your reminiscences. I'm sure we could carry on forever. But unfortunately, we have promised a global audience that we are going to start the film about the life of M.I. Okpara. And we really have to start the film in the next couple of minutes. But I need to thank you for this wonderful contribution. We would have missed a lot if we had not had you for these few minutes. Thank you very, very much for reminding us that these were people who were dedicated to service. These were people who did not allow the positions they held to go to their heads. These were people who did not need any of the pomposity, any of the standing on existing protocols and all the sirens and all the SSS and all the accoutrements that we now have in place of exercising influence. People who just were there to give of themselves completely. I mean, people have spoken about how Michael Okpara ended up even without a personal house in the end. You speak about transparency, the fact that you could see how these people were existing on their salaries. Just to draw things to a close, I just want to take 1 minute to read something that we did not have. By the time of the Civil War, Eastern Nigeria was the fastest developing region virtually in the world in terms of industrial development. But that we were midway only through the development plan for Eastern Nigeria 1962 to 1968, which Michael Okpara had devised. This plan was supposed to run to 1968, but already Michael Okpara and his team were working on a perspective development plan to run from 1968 to 1988. The principal feature of the 1962 to 68 plan was gearing for growth. Growth not in the sense of achieving grandiosity or big buildings or big pompous and pointless establishments, but to lay the foundation for future development of Eastern Nigeria, the prerequisite for putting Eastern Nigeria in a position to gear it up for self-sustaining development. The prime objective of the plan was to maintain the highest possible rate of increase in the standard of living of people in Eastern Nigeria. That was the plan, and that was what they were achieving. They had a plan to improve the standard of living of people in Eastern Nigeria. By initiating a series of development projects, both in the private and public sectors, they intended to maintain and surpass an annual growth rate of more than 4% in the economy. And because we had a surplus of human capital, the budget for that period was designed in a way to mop up the human capital. Therefore, agriculture was supposed to consume 30 million pounds. That was 40% of the budget. Trade and industry was 17% of the budget at 13 million pounds. Transportation to open up the region was consuming 8.8 million pounds. That's 12%. Education, which is fundamental to growing the human capacity of the people, was supposed to take another 8.9 million pounds, 12% of the population of the budget. Water, to make sure that we had drinking water. All the water resources you see today in Port Harcourt, Umuahia, Enugu, and all of that were built during this period, took another 5 million pounds. Town and country planning, another 2 million pounds. That was 3% of the budget. Believe it or not, to run the entire government administration, they had only 2.6% of the budget. They did not have a need for all this pomposity, private jets and all the pompous cars that will now drive up and down. So this was what was truncated by the Civil War. There are many reasons why we regret and mourn and weep about the Civil War. It stopped this plan in motion. What could have been is what we can only imagine. But let's watch the film, and then I'm sure that Ugonabo Ed Kazo will take us on a journey of trying to again rediscover the man and give us an opportunity to think about what could have been. Thank you very much, everybody, for your time. Thank you to all the participants, and thank you for organizing this Center for Memories. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you. And with that, we'll come to the end of the conversation. So we go to YouTube to see the documentary. I guess some people have already started watching. Thank you. And join us next month for another conversation on this documentary. Bye.
Bye-bye, Uchenna. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you, Ikilkehe. Thank you, Chufugochukwu. Thank you, Dr. Chidema.
Thank you for having me.
Are we staying on for the film?
No.
Documentary?
There's a different link for that. You click on the YouTube link, and then you start seeing the film. Yes.
All right.
Check in the communication. You will see the YouTube link.
Perfect.